My name is Kate McMahon, and thank you for joining us today for Profile. I'm very excited to introduce my guest today. This is Ellen Briggs. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And your organization is Protect Our Past.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Protect our past is just what it says. Protect our past. Unfortunately, we're watching around the Cape and Islands a lot of destruction of historic homes and properties. The streetscapes are changing before our very eyes, and once something is lost, it's gone forever. I want people to really think about that. So once we destroy an historic building, we've lost it forever. So our organization is about stopping that from happening, slowing it down at least. It's not going to be possible to save everything, but we can do a better job.
That's great. Now, I believe your interest really came about when there was a windmill in Chatham that was very close and near to your heart.
Yes, my great uncle built a Grest windmill out of old beams from shipwrecks off of Cape Cod. There were barnacles all over it. It was so much fun to be inside, and that's where I grew up as a child. So I have very strong, fond, wonderful memories. And when but it was eventually sold, and then people kept adding on to it. And then in 2016, September, I came to Chatham, which is where we live, and I read in the paper that they were going to demolish it, or someone had the option of moving it onto their property. I was totally stunned, and I made a few calls, and within hours, all the powers that be were at our house, and they said, "Hey, why don't you move it on your property?" And I was like, yeah, okay. I had to call my husband, who wasn't there, and said, what do you think? Should we just, yeah. And long story short, we ended up doing that. It took us well over 2 years. Almost to the date of the 18-month demolition was the day it got moved. And then, of course, now it's still in process of restoration.
Well, that's wonderful that you all were able to save that.
Yeah, and it's a labor of love. You have to have passion in order to save, and I get that. I've been on the inside of this process.
Right. So it probably changed your perspective a little bit too, and you probably saw with a new eye the amount of historic properties that we have on the Cape and Islands.
Yeah. My awareness about this issue just skyrocketed, and my passion grew alongside it. So I thought, you know what, we need to do a documentary on this mill because there's so many wonderful historic stories and personal stories attached to it. And then I realized, oh, maybe we should do one about saving historic properties, period, because we're just one of many, many examples of things that have been lost.
Right. And you saw a film at the Chatham Orpheum. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's influenced the next step of your organization?
Well, I have Thomas Benna to thank for this. He was the director of One Big Home. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you stream it. And his film took place on the vineyard, and it was about the mega mansions that are being built. And the end game of this film is that bylaws are being changed across America. Even Honolulu has changed their bylaws so that they're protecting the size of the property and making it relative to the size of the house versus a mega mansion taking over the whole property. So I thought, gee, if he can do that for that issue, perhaps he could help us with the issue of saving historic properties.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And so the idea of the documentary was born.
It was born, and so when I asked him, he said, yeah, I'd like to do it, but come meet with me. And then he met with me, and I said, well, okay. And he brought in some filmmakers, and they all said, oh yeah, let's do it. And I said, well, then what do I have to do now? And my list is very long. And I came back, I met him in the vineyard, came back to the mainland and started paring down that list. And of course, on top of it is we have to raise funds.
Yes,
now,
it comes down to the money.
I'm going to just jump ahead and say that people ask, well, why are you doing a documentary, right? Is that a question you have for me? And the answer is, it takes a big screen to change minds. I know so many people who have spent years of their heart and soul trying to slow down the destruction of historic properties. They win a few, they lose a lot. They are burnt out, they're tired, they're discouraged. I said, okay, we need to do what Thomas did for the mega mansion issue for historic properties. So that is why we're focusing on documentary. It takes the big screen to motivate and make change.
And the reach of the big screen
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes. But
Very
it's
important.
also, when you see something on screen, it becomes visceral for you. You know, reading, a good writer can do that. But not all books I read do that to me. But the big screen, if it's done well, it just gets my heart, and I'm like, okay, what do I do? What can I do to help?
Gives you
the
all
situation?
energized.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's what we're doing.
That's wonderful. So raising money. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, we need to talk about it a lot more so than I. Yeah, it's going to cost $700,000 to do this film. Now people go, Gad, $700,000, that's a lot of money. In the world of film production, that is not a lot of money. And it also covers our legal fees. You know, there are more things, more costs attached to a film than the obvious. There are these other behind the scenes costs.
Sure.
So $700,000 isn't a huge amount. Actually, I would say Thomas and his team are very generous in how they're charging us for this film.
Oh, that's great. They believe in the mission.
Yes, they do. And I'm very, very grateful for it. So we have a matching grant now, which, yay.
Congratulations.
We're very pleased with that. But there's still a lot of money to be raised because we have to match that grant. So that is definitely on top of my list of things I have to do.
Yeah, fundraise.
Yes.
Now, how can our viewers donate to your organization?
Well, if you really want to help us, and should I look in the camera and say, if you really want to help us save or slow down the destruction of historic properties, please go to protectourpast.org and press on the donate button. It's real easy, and then they take care of it right from there. It's easy.
That's great.
And I want to say every amount counts. So I'm not expecting someone to write me a check, that'd be nice, for $600,000 or
Right.
but they can write a check for $10, $50, $100, whatever.
They're
every
comfortable
bit.
with,
And then
yeah.
you become part of this effort, which I think feels good.
Very important effort. Exactly.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we should mention today?
How long do you have? Right? You know, I want to point out that there are two other projects on our list. One is education, and there's a lot of misinformation. Some people are told, when you want to build a house, you have to tear down this house. You can't get what you want if you keep this old house. You just tear it down, and that's not true. You can take a structure of an old house, and we're talking about just the shell of the house.
Right.
And you can get your modern house on the inside. That's one misperception. Another is it costs less to tear down and build a new house than it does to restore an older house. That is not always true. And the other thing is there are wonderful craftsmen out there. We have met some with the windmill that we're working on, young craftsmen who are very good at their skill and can do wonderful work, restoration work. There's a question of materials. Fortunately now they're coming out with a list of materials that you can use that are newer materials but acceptable for historic buildings. So that opens the doors. There's a lot of education that we need to disseminate, and some of that will happen on the documentary, but we need to do a booklet, something else. We need to do videos, YouTubes, all that good stuff, so that you can look at an older structure and say, I love this, and it is possible, and I have help.
Right.
So,
folks that are very interested in the restoration of older properties.
And there's so many people, I've met so many wonderful people who, and they're young people, that's
have
what's
a
so
passion
wonderful,
for it.
who want to save
great.
older buildings. So
Isn't that
that's great.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Today we had Ellen Briggs, the Executive Director of Protect Our Past, visit, and we wish you well.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Thank you. And until next time, I'm Kate McMahon, the host of Profile.